I'm sure you have heard of the Ronald McDonald House Charity. They provide housing for families of sick kids when they're in the hospital. Seems pretty innocent, right? Well, there's another side to the charity. There's another type of Ronald McDonald House, one that not many people know about. There's one in most big cities. You won't find it by looking for it. It doesn't have an address. It doesn't even have a sign above the door. And most of all, it also doesn't have windows. No, the only way you're gonna find it is if you're taken there. That's how I found it. I never met my real parents. I've been in and out of foster families and group homes here in Detroit since I was a kid. I'm 15 now, and I'm what they refer to as a bad kid. Always causing trouble, always getting thrown out of the place with another unsuspecting do-gooder who thinks they can help me, but I always prove them wrong. My caseworker has sat across a black metal table looking wary and frazzled. On the table between us was a thick, letter-sized brown envelope. My case file. "Well, your reputation has preceded you," she said, "and now you only have two options. Military school in Lansing, or the Ronald McDonald House, which has miraculously cleared you for acceptance. I don't have the patience for drill sergeants at 5 a.m. And how bad could a halfway house named after a fast food clown possibly be? Ronald McDonald House it was. Dark clouds loomed above me that day. I climbed into the back of my caseworker's town car, my few belongings in my backpack, and clothes on my back. That's all I could take. One of the few belongings I had was a photo album filled with pictures of the foster families I had been with. It was nice to remember some of them, even though I royally fucked it each time. "I've had a few cases come out of the Ronald McDonald House," the caseworker said from the front seat. "Things went so well for those kids I never had to transfer them anywhere else. In fact, the house took over their case files and everything." We drove into downtown Detroit, past all the familiar landmarks. I had been thrown out of a foster home just outside of this town because I snuck into downtown Detroit with some neighbor kids to sneak into a dive bar. Good times. Well, here we are. The car came to a stop. I looked out the window. We parked in front of a tall, gray, windowless building, sandwiched between two other industrial buildings down the narrow city street. I noticed there was an address on the building to my left and one on the right, but none of this particular building. Not even a sign. Are you sure?" I asked, hesitating as I opened the car door and climbed out of the back seat. I slung my backpack over my shoulder, clinging tightly to the strap, and followed the caseworker up to the windowless metal doors. She pressed the buzzer and spoke to someone inside, and the doors clicked open, and we walked in. As soon as the metal doors closed behind us, I noticed a pin-drop silence. It was the sort of silence that's just so oppressive and empty, it almost defeats you. Across the dimly lit lobby, there was a glass window with someone inside, a secretary. She was turned away, typing something intently. We walked over to the window. The caseworker rang the bell on the counter, and the secretary spun around in her chair. Her face was painted like a clown, like Ronald McDonald, in fact. She even had the sort of curly red hair. Otherwise, she wore a typical white nurse dress. I wanted to laugh at how bizarre this was, but I couldn't. A chill slipped down my spine. Something just wasn't right. I watched as the nurse and my caseworker interacted. The papers were passed through the window. The caseworker passed my case files under the glass as the nurse slid some papers for her to sign. As my caseworker signed the papers, the nurse looked at me. Her smile should have been warm and welcoming, but all I saw in her eyes was hunger. "What's the matter, sweetie?" the nurse asked, her voice muffled slightly by the glass. "Afraid of clowns?" I looked into her hungry eyes. Now there was a malicious glint as she laughed. My caseworker laughed too, obviously, and said, Now, don't overreact. You'd hate military school. Besides, this will be good for you." "Yes," the clown nurse said. "This will be good for you." Before I could object, I heard a slam behind me. I spun around to see who opened the door in the far corner of the lobby. To the left of the front desk window. There was no one there. Just light flooded from the door. Then the creeping shadows, shrill echoing laughter, and growing shadows along the wall side door. "Oh!" said the caseworker. "Here comes the welcoming committee." As I stood in horror, clutching the strap of my backpack, my caseworker patted me on the shoulder for the last time. "Don't worry, honey. It will be different this time. You'll feel right at home. I promise." She turned to leave. I felt a bile churning in my stomach. "No!" I said desperately. "You can't leave me here." "Oh, no, I've got to get going. I never did like clowns." And with that, she left. The metal door slammed behind her, and I was alone. I faced the open doorway by the front desk again. The shadows had almost entered the room, and the piercing laughter filled the lobby with sound. I ran for the doors and pounded and yanked and pushed and screamed. Screamed for help. Screamed for my caseworker. Screamed for anyone, please God! I turned to the nurse behind the glass, and she was smiling at me again. And then they entered, laughing all the while. A whole group of laughing nurses with clown faces and red hair. Some male, some female. But all with the same terrifying Ronald McDonald makeup. And in the dim light of the lobby, I could see the glint of metal tools in their hands. Coming up the rear was a pair of clown nurses rolling a metal table, complete with restraints. "Hey, get the fuck away from me!" I screamed. I pounded against the metal doors again. "Let me out of here!" They surrounded me, grabbing me as I thrashed, screamed, and tried to tear myself away, laughing as I kicked and squirmed. They slammed onto the rolling table and strapped me down. I looked around wildly. I was surrounded. "Let me go!" I screamed, twisting and turning and pulling at the restraints. They rolled me through the open doorway and down a seemingly endless white hallway. They laughed and laughed and laughed. They waved their shiny scalpels and razors and needles mere inches from my face just to make me flinch and scream. This made them laugh even harder. The last thing I remember, before one of them finally injected me, was hands, gloved fingers prodding the inside of my mouth and pulling the sides of my mouth, distorting my screams and forcing an unnatural grin onto my tear-streaked, sweaty face. Hot, rancid breath in my face, and the whispered, perverted voice of speaking the words, "We love to see you smile." Then, as the maniacal laughter seemed to wrap up and wind down like a dying record player, everything faded in black. I opened my eyes. I was blinded by the bright lights above, shining in my groggy eyes from the fluorescent bulbs. I turned to my side and looked around. A cell. Tall white walls, covered in stretch marks and stains, small drain in the corner of my floor, a toilet perhaps. A door with no windows, and on the floor by the door, my backpack. I tried to sit up. My body ached, and the moment I sat upright, my vision started spinning and I started to wonder what they drugged me up with. I realized I was shivering. I looked down and I wasn't wearing my own clothes anymore. I was wearing a dirty, ripped hospital gown, bright yellow with the pattern of Ronald McDonald's heads all over, and nothing underneath. I heard faint, muffled screams from somewhere in the building. It sounded like screaming. I tried to stand, but I couldn't keep my balance. My vision was beginning to stabilize, but my body felt like rubber. I sank to my knees and crawled over to my backpack, but before I got there, I tried to open the door. As expected, it was locked. I slumped onto the floor beside my backpack and unzipped it. All that remained inside was an old photo album. They had taken my notebook and pens and my cell phone. Of course they did. I warily opened the photo album, but instead of photos that had been there, photos of myself of my previous foster families, photos where I had attempted to look happy and hopeful even though I knew I wouldn't be there for long. Instead of those photos, they looked like crime scene photos, and in each one I recognized one of my former foster families brutally murdered and covered in blood. My heart raced and my stomach churned. I began to turn the pages quicker and quicker. Each page was like a new photo, a new family, a new carnage. I recognized their faces inside the homes I had lived in with all these people. And now they're dead. I came to the last few pages. A photo of a house at night. Then a window of that house. Then inside the house, a dark hallway, light coming in from the doorway. Then the photo of my caseworker brushing her teeth at her bathroom mirror. Then a photo of her looking at the camera in horror. Then a photo of the caseworker naked, covered in her own blood, and contorted in a unnatural position in the bathtub. I turned to the last page. Written inside the photo album were 3 words. You never existed. I felt bile rising in my stomach. I threw the book on the ground and crawled over to the hole in the floor and vomited. They were right. Having killed everyone who ever knew me, it was as though I never existed. I heard more faint screaming in the distance. I knew I had to get out. I wiped the vomit off my face with my hospital gown and crawled back over to my backpack. Hopefully they hadn't found my secret weapon. I unzipped the front pocket and reached down into the very bottom, my fingers scraping the fabric. Sure enough, they were there, flush with what the seams of the bag, nearly undetectable. The pins I had used for picking locks. I told you I was a bad kid. I leaned against the door and listened. I could hear footsteps approaching, but as soon as they had come, they faded in the other direction. I knew I had to work fast. I jiggled the handle with one hand and picked the lock with the other. It was surprisingly simple. Holding the handle, I slowly pulled myself to my feet. I could maintain my balance now. I pulled the door open to just a crack. A clown nurse just darted past. My heart almost stopped, but the footsteps didn't slow or change, but soon faded. He didn't notice me. I poked my head out the door. Seemingly endless hallways in either direction. The distant screams were louder now, coming from all around. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. I decided to go to the right, passing the doors identical to the one that I had been. I heard screams and sobbing from behind and everyone around me. I stopped for one moment and looked at the door. I heard the crying of a child inside. I jiggled the handle to see if I could get him out. Locked. Damn it. I kept moving, looking behind me every few seconds to make sure no nurses had come into the hallway. Then I passed double doors and stopped for a moment. The word Play Palace was written in tall, thin letters across the width of both doors. I heard more screaming coming from within. The screams of multiple people and laughter, the insane, shrill laughter of the clown nurse. I shuddered. I was afraid to find out what the torture was happening inside, but I had to keep moving. I saw the door ahead of me with a symbol, and I headed for it. As I opened the door, I glanced behind me and saw 2 clown nurses emerging from the Play Palace room. Their white nurse outfits were covered in streaks of blood. I quickly shut myself into the stairwell, hoping they hadn't noticed me. The stairwell was dimly lit, the cement walls with rusty railings. I looked behind the door. It just closed. There was a red number 5 on the door. I must be on the 5th floor, so I decided to get to the ground level. Each footstep echoed as I descended the stairs. I couldn't hear the screaming anymore, just a low, deep humming sound like pipes and walls. It was a welcome respite. I finally came to the door number 1. The staircase seemed to descend to a few floors lower, but I stopped here, slowly peeked through the door. More white hallways. No clown nurses to be seen so far. So good. I stepped through the door and walked into the hallway. I noticed I couldn't hear any screaming on this floor, just the buzz of the fluorescent tube lights above. I came to the end of the hallway and another set of double doors. A large red cross, the kind you see on a lifeguard stand or a first aid kit, was painted across the width of the doors. I pressed my ear to the door. All I heard was a slow rhythmic pulse, like a machine at work, and faintly a beeping sound, like you'd hear in a hospital room. I knew I shouldn't have opened the door. I knew this wasn't an exit. I knew I should have kept looking, but I had to see. I turned the handle. It wasn't locked, but I peeked inside. It was a nervous, carnivorous white room. Fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed. I saw wires hanging all around, and hanging from the ceiling in rows. Kids in hospital gowns like mine, attached to white wooden crosses affixed to the ceiling, literally crucified. They were silent. Their heads were drooping forward. Their eyes were either closed or staring at nothing. Some seemed to twitch, but still, most were still. Their crosses swung back and forth very slightly. And the hanging wires? They weren't wires. They were intervenereal tubes attached to kids' wrists, tubes sucking out their blood. I almost vomited again right then and there. In the very center of the room, amidst the rows of hanging crosses, I could see where the rhythmic pulses sound came from. A huge cylinder which seemed to be collecting the blood from, and all the tangled tubes that dangled from the kid's wrists. I opened my mouth to scream, or to cry out in anger. All I could say was, "What the fuck?" That's when the alarms began to sound. A loud piercing like police sirens. They must have all had realized I'd been missing. I shut the doors and frantically glanced around the hallway to see if anyone was coming. No signs yet. I ran for the stairwell. As soon as I entered the stairwell, I heard laughing from above and echoing and reverberating throughout the entire stairwell. The clown nurses were coming. I stammered down the stairs as fast as I could. I must have gone down another 3 stories before I reached the basement. I found myself running through a dark sewer-like hallway with small light bulbs overhead every 10 yards or so. The smell of decay and rotting flesh became more pungent as I ran. The laughter continued behind me. I managed to glance behind me to see a group of them running after me. I saw them come into the light and then become silhouettes again, their smiling faces and gleaming knives and needles pushing my adrenaline to the max. I ran past the alcoves full of stocked, rotting corpses, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't think of anything but escape. I turned the corner and found myself facing a metal rungs of the ladder in the wall. I climbed until my head smacked the ceiling. Below me, the shadows and the laughter grew closer. Their footsteps slowed. They were close and they knew it. I pushed the ceiling above me, heaving forward and panting and screaming. The clowns were below me, laughing and waving their scalpels. Something cut my leg and I screamed and pushed one last time. The ceiling gave way to a manhole cover slammed on the asphalt above, a circular opening. I climbed out and frantically pushed the manhole cover back over the hole, blocking out the laughter of the clown nurses below. I lay there, on top of the manhole cover for a few minutes to catch my breath. Rain fell onto my skin as the turbulent night sky was a welcome sight. I looked around the abandoned buildings, broken glass, no lights, no cars, no signs of any life at all. A police siren somewhere in the distance, then silence. An urban ghost town. I climbed onto my feet, and a pain shot through my leg. I looked down and they cut my ankle where the clown nurse had slashed me. Bastards! Limping the best I could, I started to walk. "Hello?" I called out. The only answer I got was a distant roll of thunder. "Somebody help me, please!" My foot fell on something soft and mushy. I looked down. A newspaper. It peeled off the West asphalt. Most of the ink had been faded, but I was able to make out the date. July 13th, 1992. I dropped it. An icy feeling filled my stomach, and I kept walking. Can anyone hear me?" I screamed. "Please, anyone, please." My words faded into delirious sobs. I stood still for a moment. The rain had soaked through my hospital gown, and I shivered at the wind as the wind blew. Then I saw a light in the distance. It was a big, yellow M in the sky. A McDonald's, of course. Of course. I limped to it. Then I came to the McDonald's. I saw the part of the M, and the rest of the building was completely dark. I walked continuously forward to the broken windows, locked in the darkness. I turned and surveyed the Play Palace outdoor playground. 10-foot tall structures of colored tubes for kids to crawl through. Sitting in one of the benches, a familiar figure, the Ronald McDonald statue. You know, the one where you can sit besides, and he's got his arm around your shoulders. Every kid's seen it. I shuddered at the sight. The doors were unlocked and I walked in. Out of the rain. Silence. Darkness. I noticed that the decor wasn't like the modern McDonald's you'll see. It was still the same as it was in the 80s, with the plastic booths with the red, yellow tiles. The wind seemed to whisper through the broken windows. I noticed something in the front counter. A black rectangle. I got closer to it. It was a laptop. A nearly new laptop. I let out a soft, delirious laugh. I knew what I was supposed to do. So I took the laptop outside and sat beside the Ronald statue. I opened laptop and begun to type the story. The rain falling on the keys, but I didn't care. There's nothing left to do now but wait. Because I've been noticing out of the corner of my eye, Ronald's been trying to look over my shoulder. He's laughing now. All I can do is join him.